They've got TV ads running showing children being blown up by explosives if they don't agree to cut their carbon footprint. They're calling for eco-fascism and calling it fascism and saying green fascism is good, not about the environment. None of us who have children want a bad environment. It's about power grabs and collectivism. And Lord Monckton, to give us a rundown for the next 50 minutes, graciously just got to his hotel out of a storm there with the police escorting him. It sounded like a tornado or a tempest was going on around him. He's now gotten to cover, and we're going to talk to him via cell phone from Cancun, Mexico, with so much happening as a global freeze hits much of the planet. Good to have you, sir.
Well, it's very good to be with you, Alex. I'm now actually in the security center at the Cancun Conference Center. I finally managed to get in, and there was quite a wind blowing outside. It's just about to rain. It's colder than it's been since we've been here. In fact, now 5 days they have had colder temperatures here in Cancun than have ever been recorded at this time of year since records began. So this is very exceptional. You heard about my lovely wife, Lady Monckton. She is snowed up at home. The Central England temperature record showing the coldest first week of December since 1659. And you're quite right, Alex, to put in that cautionary note about how this doesn't mean there's no such thing as global warming or we can't be having an effect on the planet. What it does mean, and again you're quite right about this, is that the rate at which this global warming is supposed to be occurring simply isn't happening. And in fact, the truth of the matter is that in the last 15 years, as Professor Phil Jones of the University of East Anglia was recently compelled to admit when I got BBC to ask him a question about it, there has been no statistically significant global warming at all for 15 years. This is beginning to be longer period to be altogether ignored as simply a blip. It is beginning very much to look as though, exactly as the likes of me have been saying all along, yes, we may get some warming, but it will be very slow and it will be very harmless. It's not going to be a problem. However, the delegates here in Cancun are exactly the usual kind of robotic crowd of enviro zombies that you would expect to find at these things, and they are going around saying the planet's doomed, as you rightly pointed out. Ted Turner is beginning to say what we've got to have is a global one-child policy, and that dreadful movie made in the UK by one of these taxpayer-funded pressure groups showing children being blown up and their blood spattered over their classmates because they had not been willing to agree with their teacher that global warming was the worstest problem ever. That is the kind of hysteria that you always get when those who have been peddling a lie realize that they're not going to be able to get away with it for very much longer. And are you still there? And one delegate recently said to one of my colleagues here, he said, oh yes, he said, of course my colleague up there on the rostrum is talking about how terrible global warming is. Privately though, he said, we know perfectly well that it isn't. But our government has told us to say this because it sees an advantage to itself against its taxpayers and against the people of the world in pretending that there is a problem. So there is a growing willingness on the part of some of the delegates here to admit that they personally don't believe a word of this nonsense. Of course, you have all the extremist groups here, the Marxists, the Greenies, and the two are virtually indistinguishable in the policies they advocate these days. They are all here in profusion. Every sort of weird organization. There are gender-sensitive women against climate change. There are people dressed up as polar bears. All this kind of stupidity goes on. But behind it all, Alex, I think there is a considerable change in tone. What is beginning to happen is, compared with the triumphalism of Copenhagen and Poznan and Bali, the previous 3 years, the annual jamborees at taxpayers' expense all around the world at exotic locations, what we're getting here is a much more sullen, sober, even somber mood. People here are beginning to realize they aren't going to get away with this for very much longer. And so, contrary to the reports that you have seen in the newspapers about how nothing very much is going to happen here in Cancun, the bureaucracy which is trying desperately to turn itself into a world government, having failed to do so when the World Government Treaty at Copenhagen was simply thrown out. Now they're trying to do it by stealth with a series of decisions at this conference, which the chairman of the conference, I've seen her note on this, thinks they're going to get away with, creating several hundred new bureaucracies, $100 billion per year from now and forever from the wealthy nations of the West to be paid to the new world government. And this will go up to 1.5% of GDP if one of the options on the paper is adopted, which it may well be, giving this new world government a permanent revenue which will permanently grow as GDP grows. So we're looking at a really ambitious power grab by the nasty people who are behind this scare. And I'm quite worried they may yet get away with it. I think they are going to get away with most of what I've just described here. And once they've got it, it'll be like the EU. Give them the money and give them the power, and then they become unstoppable, and they'll get more money and more power until they run anything. And, of course, not one of these people is elected by us, the peoples of the world. It is all a dictatorship which is gradually taking power from democratic nations and from the leaders and elected representatives of those nations and putting it into the hands of faithless bureaucrats who we cannot elect, cannot question, cannot hold to account, cannot remove, and cannot replace.
Okay, now going back in past years, they were arrogant, they were celebratory, they would, you have these huge parties, they were the saviors of the earth. Now, they're becoming a global laughingstock, but as you said, they're now burrowing down, realizing their time is short, everything that's invested in this, and they're trying to get it through. But last year, you were instrumental in helping distribute the Danish text, in analyzing it. The Third World learned that it would basically double the amount of taxes that they had to pay versus the West. It wasn't the freebie giveaway, that it was a death sentence to over 1 billion people cutting their energy. It's now admitted this is about shutting down industrialized societies. So how are they trying to ram this through? What is in the different texts that you've been able to see? Are there any secret treaties like last time? Give us the intel, Lord Monckton.
What they've done this time is they've done what one of the senior officials here, who also doesn't believe a word of this, as I say, there's a growing kind of rift in the loop now. You can see more and more people getting ready to jump ship as they see it going glug, glug, glug down beneath the waves. But one of them said, what they're going for is an approach called transparent impenetrability. And what this means is that everything I've just described to you, this extra money and the extra bureaucracies, they're all listed, they're all specified in the documents which are openly available and which nobody, including the delegates, actually reads. The note by the chair on the expected outcome of this conference, which is one I'm basing things on, because that's likely to be right. They've had several preliminary conferences, first in Bonn, then in Tianjin in China last month, to prepare for this one. So they pretty well all knew where they were going when they got here. So the chairman's note is a pretty good guide to what is actually going to happen. But get this, it's 33 pages long. It's written in the most obscurantist, obfuscatory, obnubilating style, which is enough to send anybody to sleep. And unless you know what the code words mean, you've never realized just how much of an expansion of centralized, undemocratic power this whole exercise is. For instance, let me give you an example. You wanted me to quote from these documents. They use a phrase called improving capacity building in the least developed and less well-developed countries. And you think, that sounds wonderful. So you go and you talk to a few of the UN officials who draw up this garbage, and you say, what does capacity building mean? And it's nothing to do with industrial capacity or economic capacity or the capacity to live a civilized life or educational capacity or health capacity. No, it's bureaucratic capacity. What capacity building means in these documents is that there are going to be vast bureaucracies established in these less developed countries which will come directly under the control of our new masters, the Secretariat of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That's what capacity building means. It occurs all the way through the treaties. It sounds wonderful when you read it. You think, oh, wow, I'm really doing some good for the third world here. All we're doing is putting in bureaucracies to govern them.
Yeah, to rule them under the new neo-feudalism, the environmental iron fist. Stay with us, Lord Monckton. Back after this quick break. Ted Turner, third biggest landowner in the world, behind the Queen of England and Dutch royalty. He owns 2 million acres in the U.S. He has 5 children. He has more than 20 aircraft, more than a dozen homes. He flies in on his private jet and then lectures us we shouldn't take a hot shower, we shouldn't have more than one child, we shouldn't take a hot bath. People all over England, old people being cut off their gas allowance or having to ride around in buses to stay warm, The Guardian reports. But there's plenty of gas and power for all the rich people in the U.S. and England that stand to make money off the carbon tax. Lord Monckton, I heard that you've been trying to track down Mr. Eugenics, Mr. Green Himmler, hair Ted Turner.
Yes, absolutely. The Graf von und zu Turner, he was attending a business conference at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel a couple of days ago here on the sandy strip at Cancun, and I gate-crashed the conference and went around it for a bit until eventually the organizers came along and chased me out. And they said, you're not allowed in here. The only people who are allowed into this conference are people who believe that global warming is the worstest possible problem ever in the world. And you're not allowed in. It was sort of baby talk they used. And I said, but I want to meet Mr. Turner. I'd like to issue a challenge to him. I'd like to provide some entertainment for the delegates here by having a one-to-one debate with him in front of them. Or is he going to run away and are you going to run away? He said, no, sir, you're going to run away. We don't want your sort here. So clearly, there is a reluctance on the part of Mr. Turner to face the amiable peer of the realm, Lord Monckton, on a debate about the climate. And why might that be? Well, I suspect it's the same reason, Ted Baby, as Al Baby. When I threatened to debate him, I sent a challenge to Al Gore. He also backed off. In fact, he's been backing off and running away for nearly 4 years now. So, Ted, if you're going to join the run, join the panic, join the escape, then you just avoid debating with me face-to-face. I'll debate with you, Ted Baby, anywhere in the world, on international television, and we'll take any format of debate that you like as long as it's reasonably fair, and then you and I will go head-to-head, and we'll argue this thing out, and let's see who prevails. Now, Alex, what I would advise is whatever you do, don't hold your breath waiting for a reply from Ted Turner any more than you would have done if you'd waited for a reply from Al Gore. I'm getting to run out of white feathers on my estate to send to these people who are backing out of this debate because they know perfectly well, just as the delegates here, many of them privately are now admitting they know perfectly well, that there is no global warming problem. It is simply a chimera. It is simply a device used by people who have other agendas which are extremely nasty. Here we are effectively trying to reinstall global fascism, having just got rid of it in Europe. Now here we are reinstalling global fascism in the name of saving the planet. And as you and I know, Alex, the planet was triumphantly saved 2,000 years ago, and it doesn't need to be saved again.
Expanding on that, James Cameron issued challenges to leading global warming skeptics, and then when leading one step forward, he chickened out. They will not debate it, and they know deep down it's an excuse to have a managed takeover economy. A lot of them are on record admitting that. What percentage of the higher-ups know it's a complete fraud? I mean, we know from their internal emails they know it's a fraud and that they've got to hide the truth. But, I mean, what percentage of them know it's a fraud, and then you've got the people in polar bear outfits running around. I mean, I see more and more of the camp followers realizing they were on some type of Jim Jones cult compound.
That's a very good description of this place, I must say. It is a very curious religion. Let's start with your point about whether the higher-ups know what's really going on, that they know that there isn't a problem. Let me give you an example. At last year's Copenhagen conference, one of my colleagues here, Wolfgang Müller, from the German division of the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, which I represent here at this conference,